Well met, everyone. I am Rich the Lich. Today is a Ramble Rich video where I'm showing you some of my house rules. First thing you will notice is the absence of my face. See, to get into this, we're just going to look at the nitty-gritty of it. We're going to scroll through this document, talk about it a little bit. You just need to focus on what you need to focus on. Don't worry about me. So let's get started. So this is sort of a house rule campaign primer that I put together for my players for an upcoming campaign in Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Some of this aren't necessarily the house rules that I use in all of my games. There's a couple here that you'll see on this page, what you're looking at right now on screen, that are specific to the current campaign. But I'll still go over them very quickly. So for this particular campaign, they are starting with new characters. They all begin at level 1. They will be allowed to play any class they want from the official books. But there are a couple of players that will often come to me and ask if they can use something from an outside source or something unofficial such as Unearth Arcana, stuff like that. And I will always listen and kind of get to the nuts and bolts and the bottom of what they're looking for. Is it an actual gameplay mechanic that maybe something in the official books doesn't have, or are they just looking for a little more change in style and flavor? In which case I will usually allow them to make those decisions and make those changes. But for the most part, I try and stay as much as possible with official material. In this particular campaign, I'm going to have my characters all start with the 27-point buying system, where you can see here as I scroll down, you buy your ability point cost. This is just straight up information from the player's handbook, so nothing too crazy and innovative here. For this particular campaign, this is not a house rule that I am going to be using at all times. For this particular campaign, I'm letting my players begin with a feat. There's a few things that as we get through this, you'll notice I'm taking away from the players. So I like to sort of reciprocate by giving something back a little bit. So they all get to start with a feat. That's a big deal. I don't allow the variant human. Racial ability, don't worry about that. That's just as it was. I was playing with the idea of taking the +2/+1 to racial modifiers for your ability scores and allowing the PCs to put that anywhere they wanted, which would allow them to therefore play any race they wanted. But I decided to go against that, and I like the kind of the headache that it can cause of you wanting to really play the flavor and theme and style of a Minotaur, but the strength and constitution maybe is not very conducive towards your wizard character, and so on. So I left it as is. This just mentions what races are playable. I gave the PCs that don't have access to either D&D Beyond or they don't have the actual Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica book, I gave them sort of this little cheat sheet of showing you what all the traits and various things that each race would offer to them. We'll scroll past that very quickly because those aren't house rules per se. This is just sort of a player's guide, if you will, a primer to the upcoming campaign. So here's a house rule that I'm going to be using not just in the upcoming campaign, but from here on out. I changed the rest. I found this somewhere. I was searching on the internet, some message board forum. Someone had mentioned something like this, and I really like it. So all other things are equal to what's in the player's handbook. You know, the fact that you can spend hit dice at the end of a short rest and your action surge comes back on a short rest, things like that. So that's all the same. Nothing's changed in that regard. The first short rest, though, these are my changes. The first short rest that the PCs take is only 15 minutes long. And then at the end of that 15 minutes, they can do all the normal short rest things. The second short rest goes up to 30 minutes, and then the third one is an hour. After that hour short rest, which is what your standard would be, right? The only rest that the PCs can benefit from is a long rest, period. It doesn't matter if you've had 3 days pass before any rest. 3 days ago was their third 1 hour short rest. They can't then reset and sort of take another short rest type. In order to rest at all, they need to do this long rest. Now, for long rest, I've changed this for the last 2 campaigns I've run, and I really like it. So, first things first, why do I house rule? And house rule is just that. It's just what I want to run at my table. None of this is a fit. It's not necessarily a fit for every person's table, but there may be something here that you like, and maybe you want to run with it and give it a shot. I run 10 players. 10 players skews the entire system. I always run my own campaigns, my own worlds. Now, yes, my next one coming up, I'm using the world of Ravnica, but it's my own adventure, my own story. I don't do modules, adventure, pre-published stuff necessarily. So, in that I'm creating my own stuff and I have 10 players, there's so much to wrangle in. The CRs, the combat length of time, just actual real life gameplay time that a combat takes is unwieldy. The amount of actions that I have to deal with from my PCs is unwieldy because they're going to get minimum of 10 actions when there's 10 players and so on. So there's just a lot that I have to juggle, and the way that I offset that is I just create some house rules and things that just work for the size of my group and the pace and flow of my campaign. So for long rest, all the normal stuff applies, except you don't regain lost hit points at the end of a long rest anymore. Oh, I messed up. Typo. Sorry. You do not regain lost hit points at the end of a long rest anymore. And the reason for that is because they just have enough healing output among 10 characters. And I want them to spend the hit dice. And I want to kind of have the ability to heal as a little bit more of a resource that they have to manage. So I don't just give them the video game mechanic of you're fully healed. Also, at the end of long rest, since I'm dealing with this new short rest thing, your 3 short rests will refresh. So the minute you finish a long rest, you now have access to your 15-minute, 30-minute, and 1-hour short rest once again. Combat. I do use timers. As I just said, too many players. Way too much going on. It's a lot to wrangle in. I need to kind of herd that and get some semblance of control and some speed. And also to just raise up the intensity of a combat. Raise the stakes, if you will. So I will use timers. In this particular case, I basically give my players each about a minute, and I'll give some warnings, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, and then after that, I'm not giving them another, hey, that's it, time's up, what's your final? No. If they haven't decided what they want to do, now as long as they've decided what they want to do, the details of me looking up a spell that they're going to cast, or maybe them asking a question that they need some clarification on, that could go beyond the timer, but I just need them to make a decision of what they're doing. Otherwise, what I do is I just keep them in place. They don't move. They're done for the round or their turn, and I automatically give them the dodge action. So they don't feel completely shorted. There's some benefit, but you kind of didn't get a chance to do what you wanted to do. So I give all my players 1 minute. You figure every round of combat, therefore, is going to take 10 minutes plus myself. So it helps kind of keep it. My combats don't last more than 3 to 5 rounds anyway, so it works out. And as I say here, if you happen to be concentrating on a spell, even though you kind of lost your action by taking too long, I'm not going to take that away from you. The concentration is still going on. No planning during combat. Plan before combat. This all kind of ties into the entire thing of, really gearing down to the intensity and just the pacing and the urgency that initiative-based timing should have. It should feel different than normal roleplay, sort of out of encounter timing. And in order to do that, you can make some really big distinctions. I tell my players plan before combat. If they're not able to, then that's what's known as a surprise round or an ambush from me. Cross-table talk during combat is eating away at the active player's timer. If there are questions for me, I'm only going to answer them if you're the active player. So basically, I just don't want to bog down anything. When other players start chiming in on like, dude, you should do this and you should do that, remember, this is all happening within initiative timing. That active player's timer is running out. If they choose to let that timer run out because they're busy trying to not only figure out what they want to do, but they're trying to take into consideration what everyone else at the table wants them to do. It's just, if you think of it from a big scene point of view, there's 3 fighters over there in the corner that are 120 feet away from the mage or the wizard, and they're fighting this giant. They are not technically going to be able to turn around and sort of negotiate and deal with what that wizard wants to do because they want to throw some AE effect. I like to keep the sort of chaos and intensity of battle. So in that regard, I don't really allow a lot of cross-table talk. It's going to eat away at the timer. And when you're talking to me, unless it's your turn, I'm not really answering any questions. So that being said, I will do a setup, an intro, a ramble, a DM monologue sort of thing to tell my players what's happening. I throw down battle mat, terrain, all this other stuff, the miniatures, and I basically explain everything. I tell them this is what you see, and it encourages the players to really listen to what I'm saying, to pay attention to all of the little details, see what they can pick up, because once they go to ask me within the timing of initiative, if it's not your turn, I'm not even going to answer, and then when it is your turn, I'm going to then ask you very simply, right here, once we are in initiative, further questions for me related to the things that you should have paid attention to, or if I didn't tell you, there's a reason for that. It's because you're supposed to spend your character's turn, your action, using skills such as investigate, such as perception, in order to try and discern a little more information. So I like to kind of really change and make some distinctions between, are we in initiative-based timing and are we sort of out of initiative right now? And therefore, what I'll often do is I will also say, I will wait until everyone is good. And if they all say, okay, we're ready, then I'll say, okay, now roll initiative. Once that clicks in, everything changes. If they're not ready to roll initiative yet and there's a bunch of ambiguity and just a bunch of questions, I'll try and answer all that for the sake of making sure they have all the information they need, but I also want to force them to pay attention. So those are some combat timing things. Initiative. First off, all my monsters go at the same time. And then what I do is I create an initiative DC. As it says here, these DCs will be determined by various factors. What bad guys do I have involved? So are we talking about really perceptive, ambushy, roguish type groups? What external factors, such as whether I even wanted to possibly use a surprise round, but I decided not to? How relaxed is the group? Are they expecting a fight? Are they at the bottom of a dungeon walking into what they believe is the boss's room? Or are they taking off armor and sharpening their blades and four of them are asleep in a rest, type of thing? So what are distractions? Is there rain? Is there loud noise? Are there massive crowds? Are there other things that might sort of take the PC's attention away from being able to quickly perceive a threat? Those things factor into whatever the DC is. Once I have this initiative DC, I basically say roll initiative at that DC. And then every player rolls at the same time using normal rolls, right? D20 plus dex plus whatever you have. So if you have advantage on initiative rolls, if you have the alert feat, and so on. And then beginning on my left and going around the table, remember, I've got 10 players. Beginning on my left and going clockwise, I will ask each player if they beat the DC. The first player that says yes, they go first. And for the remainder of combat now begins with that player and goes around the table in clockwise fashion. As you can tell, if none of the PCs beat that DC and we keep moving from the left player and then to his left and to his left and to his left, as we start making our way around the table, it's going to start getting closer and closer to me. And that's where you have that, depending on how difficult the DC is, that's going to determine where I lie as a dungeon master and where I get to go with my monsters. What else? Identifying a spell. I found this recently. I've had Xanathar's Guide for a while, but I never found this, and it does identify some questions, or it does address some questions that have been brought up many times in my games. So I'm using the details that Xanathar's provides on how you identify a spell. I'm not going to go over that. You can find that in the book. Healing Spirit. I believe that's from Xanathar's as well. I think that spell is broken. It just made... Even though I know that you don't auto-heal at the end of a long rest, and I want players to sort of manage that resource a little better, it is too powerful of a spell for level 2, so I now give a number of charges, and that the number is equal to your total character level. Now, you can always upcast it and have those charges be worth, I think it's like a d6, right? So let's say my level 10 druid is trying to cast this spell. He would have 10 1d6 heals that he can throw out, that the players can kind of do that crazy revolving door, conga line or whatever, back and forth through the Healing Spirit. But if he was to upcast it, he would still have the same amount of charges, which is 10, but now each of those 10 would now heal for maybe 2d6 and so on. So they can still heal each charge for more depending on what level they cast the spell at, but they're limited on how many charges they have now. Divine Intervention. And this one, the initiative thing I saw somewhere online, someone had done something similar to it. And Divine Intervention, someone online, I read this and I really liked it. Divine Intervention, the clerical trait ability, it always works now. You roll a d10, and then depending on the result, you're basically going to dismiss a 10. But anything from 1 to 9, from the cleric spell list, you choose a spell equal to or lower than the result on the roll. And then that spell is automatically cast. It doesn't require components. It doesn't require concentration. And if it does have concentration, it lasts for the entire duration. So it's an automatic thing. Find Familiar and the whole familiar thing has always been a sticking point for me. I never liked it, but I don't want to just completely keep taking away from the players. So one of the big changes I've done is owls in my game, which includes owl familiars, of course. they no longer have flyby attack. And as it says here, they're going to get the shit beat out of them as they attempt to now aid in combat. They're not just going to fly in, provide advantage. Anything in my games that provides advantage, I really go through it with a fine-tooth comb, because I believe that's such a powerful mechanic. I never want to have that become exploited, or things that provide advantage with no consequence at all to the players, I think can be a little too powerful. And in this regard, the whole find familiar thing, it became a little unwieldy. So owls don't have flyby attack anymore. Critical hits. It's always anticlimactic to me to see the barbarian or the thief roll, and then he gets a crit, and he rolls double dice, but he rolls 1s and 2s. So my crits can be pretty lethal. I think I first saw this from the member of WotC, the employee, the awesome DM Chris Perkins. You basically max all damage from all dice, not just weapon dice, and then you roll all your damage dice, and then you add your modifiers. So a rapier was a D8, and then a rogue that has 3d6 sneak attack. Well, they're automatically going to deal 18 and 8. They're automatically going to deal 26 damage, and then they rolled the D8 plus the 3d6, and then they add the applicable modifiers. What did I just say about advantage, disadvantage? It's a very powerful mechanic. Be careful with things that offer that almost too easily sometimes. Therefore, cloaks of displacement, they have not existed. Basically, since the first few months after 5th edition came out, I started running this group of players through these campaigns. I've removed them very early on. I don't track magical ammo. Don't be ridiculous. You're not carrying 700 arrows. You're not going to therefore sell them and try and, create some racket or market on it. It is what it is. I don't track basic food and rations. You're assumed to have what you need. Now, this is all under the assumption that somewhere in downtime you've passed through some place where you can resupply. If you're in the bog of, the deep, darkest parts of a dungeon for 9 weeks, I'm going to start kind of having exhaustion and various things come into play in constitution checks. But generally, they don't have to track that. But what I also do with food is any players or the group, when they start to seek out more high society stuff, so what's basically I think considered comfortable, wealthy, and aristocratic, when they start seeking out those resources, so whether it's a good inn, a place where they're resting in silk beds, and they're seeking out that quality of food, I may often give them sort of 24-hour buffs or temporary hit points or something like that. So it gets them, they don't have to track basic food and rations, but it gives me just another little roleplay detail that I can throw them sort of throw them a bone and give them an extra boon if they really go out of their way to try and roleplay themselves to spend the extra money and find better accommodations. I also don't track encumbrance, but here common sense applies. If you can basically explain to me how the hell you're carrying 4,000 pounds in arms and armor, we'll figure it out, but otherwise I believe these are sort of just big ones that when you think about what's there, always think about the idea that what is it adding to the game? And for me, I hope you notice that a lot of these are just adding a little more speed and efficiency of getting rid of, as it says, just mundane stuff that just doesn't provide a lot of value by having you have to endure, oh, you ran out of your rations. Dude, didn't we just pass the inn to, a week ago? And so on and so forth. This is a big one I've seen everywhere. Drinking a potion is a bonus action, but giving it to another is an action. Administering it, at least, say they're unconscious. This is a big one. 2 PCs at max. Because remember, I have 10 players, right? So I'm not going to do a round robin around the table where keep going, guys, until someone makes it. If you're trying to unlock a door or get through a trap. Once 2 PCs attempt a specific skill, this is important, for a very specific thing, that's it. If they both failed, there's going to have to be a rest, a short or a long. It can be the short one, so if they're on the first short rest, which is only 15 minutes, after that, though, then they can attempt again. Once again, max of 2 PCs. I use the rest thing as sort of Gandalf sitting there, right, before they go into Moria, and it just takes a little bit of just relaxation and kind of clear your head before you figure out the puzzle, right? But, like I said, I just don't want everyone to have 10. Oh, I'll do it. I'll try it. You failed. I'll try it until they make it. There's consequences for that. The help action. So the help action specifically talks about, here's just the simplest example. One of the players in my group, his name is Chip. He's hanging off a cliff. He doesn't have climb or acrobatics. But in favor of the PCs, I'll allow either a strength or a dex check for him to wrangle his way back up onto the ledge. Someone can aid him and allow that roll to be made with advantage. That's the point of the help action, right? But they're helping him with an attribute. It's just a strength or a dex. However, Dasha, another one of my players, is trying to discern the extent of an NPC's injuries. This isn't just a wisdom thing. I asked that the medicine skill must be involved. Dasha attempts a medicine check because she's proficient in it. In this case, I don't care if 6 other PCs have a wisdom of 23. And yes, I know there's an attribute tied into the skill check, but because they are now doing a skill check, not just an attribute check, if no one else is proficient in medicine, they're not able to aid her. So there it is. One character with 10 players, once again, you can see the trend and the pattern of the amount of players at my table and what I have to deal with my group dictates what sort of changes I might need to make for the benefit of the group and the game. And of course, once I send this aid out, if half of the group is, no, dude, that sucks, that's terrible, I'm going to listen. I'll listen to I'm not saying I'm not going to change, but I will listen to my players, okay? I'm the one that has to cat herd and deal with 10 players, so they have to have some level of respect and consideration towards how I want to do it, because I'm also the one that knows behind the scenes what are the ramifications of such things. So one character, when a real life person is gone, their character's also gone. Since I'm running Ravnica coming up, that's going to be convenient for me because I can easily say that they're sort of busy in some sort of guild related activity. So, and that's just so that I don't bog down the game with other players at the table having to figure out how another character that's not their own is, works, and reading their sheet. Dude, where does he have his attack bonus? You know what I mean? That's always a thing. And with 10 players, even though with 10 players, I don't often have people missing. I actually have the full loadout. I have 10 people show up a lot. But it also gives an opportunity when players are missing that it speeds up the game automatically because I don't have to go through another initiative count and so on. So, whereas that would be even slower if another player has to now take ownership of that character. And then the last one is more specific to my current campaign, and this is just where I'm going with it brainstorm-wise of how I want the campaign to flow. I've restricted the guilds. That has nothing to do with a house rule. That's just more of a primer for think on these things. Here's how the new campaign is going to go. So that's all I've got for you folks. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you later.